Welcome to the Holy Rebellion. Dr. Rob Wright, welcome to the Holy Rebellion. We're glad to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm glad that you invited me. Pleased to be here.
So will you just give us a quick sampling of who you are, what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a psychology professor at Brigham Young University, Idaho. I've been here for going on my 12th year now. It has been great. I love being a professor. I primarily do teaching, but I do some research on the side as well. I teach classes covering the field of health psychology, which is really devoted to looking at the connections between our psychology and our behavior and how that influences our health in broad speaking terms. And then I also do, like I mentioned, a little bit of research, but excuse me, I should also mention I teach the research class as well. Makes sense.
That's a big one.
That's what I've been doing. Before that, I was a postdoctoral researcher at Oregon Health and Science University for a couple years. Did my PhD at Portland State University. And I am an Aggie. I did graduate at Utah State University. So that's a little bit about me.
So I know a lot of people have strong feelings about you being an Aggie. I do not personally. I think they have good ice cream, and that in and of itself makes me a fan. So,
ice cream.
So as I understand it, and I never went to BYUI. I went to regular old BYU Idaho or BYU Provo. But as I understand it, that BYU Idaho is primarily like a teaching school, and the research is ancillary. Is that true? Do I have that right?
Yeah, that is correct. I'm hired on to pretty much teach full time. However, I've found as I've been doing that, and I love teaching, by the way. That's what drew me here, and that's what keeps me here. I love it. I have found that my teaching is enriched, though, as I do some research projects on the side. It's not part of my contract. I don't need to do them. But I also teach the research courses up here, too, and so it really helps a lot to keep my hands in the research scene. And it also really is neat to see the students as, you talk about a textbook, and that's great, but it's pretty dry. I mean, some of these textbooks, you can salt the earth with them, if you know what I mean. But if you pull out some studies that you've been doing here with students, here on campus, ongoing things, even having students help with the process as well, my goodness, it really makes a big difference in my quality of teaching and the quality of learning and understanding on the part of my students.
So this research you've been doing, these are all just kind of passion projects then?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. My wife has mentioned to me in exasperation sometimes, why do you do this, Rob? You don't need for your job. And like you said, though, and like I've been saying, I do enjoy it.
So as my kids would say, it's for funsies.
Yes.
Well, so part of the Holy Rebellion, we really focus a lot on worship, the orientation of our life. And it's really, the idea is we just want to be a rebellion against the gods of the world, which I think fits really well with some of the research you've done. We'll dive into in a minute. But just to ask the direct question, who or what do you worship, Rob?
Oh, I love that question. And it's something that I wish more people would ask and be more cognizant of, even on a daily basis. I worship my God, and my God is the Savior, Jesus Christ. And that is very near and dear to my heart. It's near and dear to everything I do. Of course, I'm not perfect, and so I do slip up on that, and I do take my focus off of that at times. But the nice thing about it is that He is so forgiving and willing to allow me to come back that I just keep coming back. I love Him. And I love, again, my job. I kind of hinted at that earlier, being part of a mission where our focus is trying to help people to become disciples of Jesus Christ. I can't think of anything better. When people ask me what I do, I say I'm just living the dream.
Because you really are. Everybody says that. Nobody means it, but you are.
I do enjoy it. So that would be my response to that. I think that uh, keeping that focus, although it's difficult, it's what I try to do, and I hope more people would too. I think that there's a lot of benefit to it.
Yeah. So what led you to that? Like, if you could share a story of like what led you to put your faith in Jesus Christ?
Well, every good discussion starts off with a good story, doesn't it?
It
That's
should, yes.
that's what I usually tell my students in the classroom. There have been a number of experiences that I've had, and as I've been pondering on what I might be able to share that people might find helpful, uh, one of my earliest experiences that I can remember was related to my health. And I was in ninth grade, and I don't mean to be too crass or too negative about it, but I was the fat kid, and I had a really hard time with that. I got really sick. I actually got strep throat, and we couldn't figure out that it was strep throat, and it actually migrated down into my stomach.
No.
And so, anyway, there were a lot of complications there, and I gained a lot of weight, and didn't feel very good about myself, especially with my peers. Had to take homeschool for a period of time during ninth grade, and it just was a rather dark time for me. However, I had have great parents, and they supported me through all of that, and I tried to navigate that. I found that reading scriptures, going to seminary, I found that praying helped a great deal. And that helped pull me through that. And so I learned at that rather tender age of about 15 or 16 years of age that God is there for me. And that's fact. He's there. Whether I can feel him or not, that doesn't matter. He's still there. And I learned very early on during that experience that is very true. And from then on, through serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I was called to serve in Korea, of all places.
Wow,
and
yeah.
I should clarify that's South Korea.
South.
And I had no idea what I was getting myself into, other than I knew that I wanted to serve. I knew I wanted to share my testimony. And so I went to this place called the MTC, the Missionary Training Center there in Provo, Utah, and started to learn this language. And my goodness, that's crazy language. It's so challenging. In fact, at the time when I was there, they said it was the second hardest language for native English speakers to learn. Finnish in Finland I was told, was number one, and Korean was number two. I got off the plane when I got to South Korea, and I was there with several other missionaries, and we all kind of looked at each other with this, deer in the headlights type look. Is this the language we've been studying for the past 3 months? Because it was so wildly different. And I remember there, and the main reason I share this part of the story is because I remember being very frustrated. I had a burning testimony of my Savior, Jesus Christ. I had a testimony of the veracity of the Book of Mormon. I knew what I was there for, and I couldn't share it with people. It was very frustrating to me. And I remember one particular day, and it wasn't a special day. I probably happened many times, but I was praying, and I just, can you help me so I can be able to speak? And I turned to the Doctrine and Covenants that day. I believe it's section 30. I love how with our church we're in Come Follow Me, and we're reading the Doctrine and Covenants this year. I believe it was section 30 or 33. I forgot to write that down, but in it there's 3 verses where it's repeated, open your mouth and it will be filled. Open your mouth and it will be filled, like Nephi of old, and repeated like that. And so I said, okay, I'm going to open my mouth. I'm going to try this out. And it was a real testimony to me that it took time. I'm going to acknowledge that. But by the time of the end of serving in my mission, I could not only say what I wanted to say in terms of the gospel, but I was blessed very much and able to say many other things so that I could connect better with people, to the point where my mission president said I was one of the best speakers. And I don't say that to gloat or to boast by any means. but to demonstrate that through that experience, my testimony and my confidence in my God was increased even more.
Yeah. Man, that is fun. Similar experience with Spanish, and Spanish is so easy, especially compared to some of those Asiatic languages. But it kicked my butt, and it's mostly because I'm just kind of dumb. But I think that if I didn't have to speak it to survive, I would speak it or die, starve and die. And if God didn't help me, there's just no way I would have been able to learn Spanish, let alone Korean. There's a reason I didn't get called to Korea. I don't think I would have made it. Bless you guys.
I loved it. I really did. It was very difficult to learn the language, and I don't mean to paint that in a negative light by any means, but that experience, not only learning the language, but going over there and serving for a full-time period of service like that really helped me out.
Yeah. So it seems to me that there's been this thread, this pattern in the stories you've told of the Lord just supporting you in these difficulties that you've had. Do you find that still true?
Yes, I do. Again, just because or anyone, is my belief, can't feel him all the time, that doesn't mean that he's not there. I've went through many other experiences, several related to my health that probably don't have time for me to go into depth there. Fast forward a few years to, post-college and trying to find a job, which, like I mentioned, is 12 years ago before I came here. But I came here to BYU, Idaho, and I interviewed, and I loved it. I loved the experience. I interviewed at a few places, but here I just love the feeling. They tried to put a name to it, call it Spirit of Ricks, or, the Spirit, right?
Yeah.
And I found myself, at the time I didn't have many prospects. I mean, I interviewed at a couple places. I mean, but money was tight, and I mean, there was that influence too. We had 2 children at the time. So, of course, there's that concern. I want to acknowledge many of our listeners probably have families, young families probably. And so there was some real concerns there. But I found myself on my knees many times, and I'm going to use a strong word, but begging that I could be part of this mission that was here at BYU, Idaho. And I say this with a bit of trepidation because I know there's many people who would love to come back here and teach because of what they've felt and what they've experienced. I'm sure, Christian, you probably had something similar there in Provo, at BYU Provo.
Yeah, maybe a lesser spirit than Rick's, but it was there. It was good.
Well, who am I to compare? But the idea is that I know that many people would like to be here, and so I found myself begging, can I please be here? And there've been plenty of times when my prayers have not been answered in the way that I wanted them to be, and so I don't mean to gloss over that either, but and I found myself, really asking, can I be here? Can I be here? And it took quite some time. Actually, I was originally hired on as a temporary hire. But then, and I was also told that there would not be a permanent position become available. And so, again, I'd be here for 2, maybe 3 years, and then I'd have to move on, was what I was told.
Yeah.
However, miraculously, a job position did open up, and I still had to go through the same interview process and still was sweating and nervous about getting it. But in the end, I did get it. And I look back at that, and I wonder why. I have wondered, why didn't he just give it to me?
Yeah.
If he knew that this is going to be the outcome, and he's all-knowing, he knows that, why didn't he just give it to me? And as I pondered on that over the past few years in particular, it's dawned on me that if he would have just given it to me, it wouldn't mean as much to me. Because I had to work for it. I had to put in the effort. And so when you ask me, can I see God's hand still in my life today? That right there is another example I go back to, demonstrating that he is there. And even when he's making us work for it, even when he's not giving us exactly what we want, when we want it, he knows it all. And we sometimes need to put in the work. And sometimes we still don't get it. But we have to remember, at least my faith is, that we have to remember that it's not just about the destination, as glorious as that can be. It really is about becoming someone, becoming something through this process. And part of that is learning how to reach out, put in the effort to feel after him, as his scriptures say.
Are you a Brandon Sanderson fan?
Well, I'm somewhat vaguely familiar. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, there's just a very prominent line in his biggest series, the Stormlight Archive, that is Journey Over Destination. And I'm in the middle of that, and phenomenal books, by the way, but it's extremely powerful. And that book is just an illustration of that specifically. It's about becoming along the way. So I think that's beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you. It's nice to know you. You've got quite the story there. So you've done a lot of research. You sent them over to me, and I don't really know what it means. I'm just not equipped to. I've never took a research class. I want to know what you did and what you learned, and how we could apply that in our lives, how we could use that to become better disciples of Jesus Christ.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christian. So for those listeners out there, I've done a bit of research specifically looking at social media and how and our use of it and how that's related to our health and wellness here in Rexburg, Idaho, or BYU, Idaho. And as I've been doing that, there's been a few things that have stood out to me and to, from our research and things of that nature. First of all, I should probably say this is not a highly funded, grant-funded type, high-profile type research. We have published a number of times in peer-reviewed journals, which is usually the gold standard, considered to be the gold standard. But I do also want to mention that, we're pretty low scale. And so there may be some things that might be particular to BYU Idaho students, which is whom we have done the majority of this research with, I should say. Nevertheless, I think there's some things that we can take away from this.
Yeah, there's lessons for all of us in it.
Sure. Specifically looking at how this is related to our health and wellness. So when I first got here about 12 years ago, and my goodness, can I just say how much the world has changed in the past 12 years is astounding. But when I first got here, I was walking around campus. Again, I told you I love being here, love seeing the students, love the energy here. But I've noticed, and I've been noticing over the years, it's increased, how many students I walk by who have headphones.
Yeah.
Or they're glued to a screen as they're walking. In fact, if memory serves me right, I watched a student who was so engrossed in a screen, he's looking at his phone, that he ran into a pole right. Poor guy. I'll admit,
he had it coming.
I did laugh. I'm a professor, not a saint.
Yeah.
But anyway, it got me thinking. These types of things that I'd been seeing, as well as some sobering statistics that have only got more sobering, more concerning over the years about loneliness. And about how students in particular, over 80%, so 4 out of 5 students at some point will say that they've experienced profound perceived loneliness while during their academic career. And so again, that's a little concerning. And then I was seeing the social media, so I was like, oh, well, let's do a study. Let's gather some data and see what's going on here. Let's ask about daily social media time, the time that you spend on social media. And then let's ask about loneliness. And we asked a few different questions about depressive symptoms. We didn't diagnose. We're not clinicians, but we did ask about depressive symptoms and a whole host of other health behaviors such as diet, sleep, exercise, those types of things. And our results came back, and we had over 600 students participate. And when our results came back, we found that there was a modest yet significant, meaning it's systematic, between the time you spend on social media daily and increased amounts of perceived loneliness. We dug into it a little bit deeper, and we found those who were married had the lowest rates of loneliness. Makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
However, you could still be lonely if you're married. We've done a couple follow-up studies and found that is still true. It still can be an issue. But it does seem to be a protective factor. We also found that those who were women, so female students consistently had higher time spent on social media and higher ratings of loneliness, which led us to wonder, maybe there's something going on there that making women more susceptible or vulnerable. And I don't mean to offend anybody by this. That's not my point. But
You're just presenting the data.
that's right. That's what we found. And one theory that's out there in the literature is that women tend to socialize more. There's actually a theory called tend and befriend. And so when women in particular are under high amounts of stress, which may be consistent with the college student life, that they may seek out their social circles more. And in fact, we think that's what's going on here from this original study, is that, social media offers a nice avenue whereby someone could go in and not only maintain contacts, but create new ones as well. And so maybe there's something going on there is what we were thinking. But then I had a couple of students come to me, a few months later, and they said, well, Dr. Wright, surely all social media is not bad. No, let me say that a different way. There's got to be some social media that's good. I mean, Look at how common it is, and people love using it. There must be some good here. And so we pondered on that a little bit, and then I unexpectedly was contacted by Joya Incorporated. They're the corporation that runs the popular social media app Marco Polo.
Okay.
Have you heard of that one before?
Yeah, I used it very briefly for like a week period, and it's not for me, but very cool.
So it's a platform where you can record videos in real time, and then you can send them to designated people, and then they can open it up and look at it, on their time. So kind of like the convenience of email, but more authentic type experience in terms of social interaction.
Yeah.
Since there's a video picture. And they contacted me and say, Dr. Wright, we don't think that the people who use our app are as lonely as the people who use other apps. And they gave me a small grant, and they said, go ahead and we'll fund this, see what you can find out. And so we looked at another 600 or 700 students here again, and we found some interesting findings. Again, I'm not trying to slander any particular app. Every app has its pros and its cons. But in terms of health and wellness and loneliness specifically, we did find that there were certain apps that had a better profile associated with their use than others. For instance, those who used Snapchat specifically were reporting poor health related profiles. I use the word profile because I can't say cause. I'm not saying it's causing it. In fact, people who are not feeling very good or don't have very good health might be drawn to certain apps. I mean, it could be a reverse causation or something altogether different that's causing both.
But there's some pattern there.
Right. We did see that there's a relationship, though, that the more you use Snapchat, the more, or well, I should say, the poorer the health variables. Okay. We also looked at LinkedIn, and LinkedIn was quite a bit different than Snapchat, for example. But LinkedIn, it had no negatives. If you were a LinkedIn user compared to those who did not have LinkedIn, you had, I think we found that you had better self-control. Of course, the reason why you get on these apps can certainly vary.
Yeah.
I'll tell you more about that.
You don't really scroll LinkedIn. It's like a very specific targeted purpose generally.
Right. And what do they refer to that now as doom scrolling? Is that?
Yeah,
I think
doom scrolling.
The term.
You're hip. You're hip, Rob.
Well, thank you. I do try. Just ask my students. I probably try too hard, but anyway. But then we got to Marco Polo, and sure enough, Marco Polo users had lower loneliness than those who did not use Marco Polo. And so this kind of ties into that idea that I was mentioning earlier, that a video type format of communication through social media might actually have some better health benefits for us. Number one, I think because you're broadcasting to a specific audience with Marco Polo. A Snapchat or some of these other ones, you are sending it just out there for people to see. but you're sending it to a specific person. So that suggests that there's some intent to connect.
Okay.
And then it's a video-based format, making it more of an authentic type of an experience here as well.
So how much is Marco Polo paying you to say all this?
Well, certainly there could be some bias here. But we found this irrespective of what they paid us, and they've moved on. They probably don't even remember me anymore. But we were one of those first little pilot studies that they were doing.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So I was kind of in that weird generation where we had Facebook. Right? We grew up with Facebook. That came out in high school, I think, and then Instagram came out towards the end of high school, and then you started to get all the derivatives. So Snapchat. So I was never on Snapchat. Then I went on my mission, and I came back and I got married almost immediately. So I have zero dating app experience. But when I came home, it was like the Reels started to get big. So it was the Facebook, YouTube, Instagram Reels. And so I was on, it ended up being YouTube Reels a lot. And then briefly, we just tested out Marco Polo and those kinds of things. So my experience is really low, but what I see is that the younger generation, like my brothers, I've got 5 brothers and 4 of them are younger, and the youngest is 18 now. And so I still have some connection to that age group. He uses Snapchat all the time, and I think most of the younger generation use it all the time. But from what I understand, it's like, I know you can post and send it to everybody, but to have a conversation with somebody, you're like sending a picture. So could the difference be the picture versus an actual video as well? Is that a factor?
Yeah, I think that, that's what we're really talking about with this more authentic type of communication. And the other idea, actually, I had a student one time and say, social media in general is really tempting. Really tempting. It draws you in. And not only that, but it draws you in with this idea, and I don't want to call it a false idea because I think there are some good things to social media. I really do. But it brings you in with this idea that you're going to get something from it, right? You're going to get a social connection with someone. You mentioned dating apps. Maybe there's some dating prospects, staying connected with people you haven't seen for a long time or who are on the other side of the world. I mean, there's some really good stuff. But one of my students said that social media is the empty calorie of communication.
I love
And
that.
I really liked that perspective. And it's a little too grossly oversimplified. I mean, I'll admit that. But, you think about these empty calories, or at least what we refer to that, like a soda drink or, some type of a, quick, sugary, feel good type thing. And yet once you drink that, or once you have that, it doesn't leave you as satisfied as if you ate a full meal or if you ate something that was more satiating, right?
Right.
And I think that that's kind of what we're seeing with social media in general. Now, are empty calories bad? Heavens no. Well, we all have them. They all taste good.
A little snack now and then. Delicious.
Every now and then, right. But this over-reliance on it, I think, is where we're seeing some issues.
So I actually have, let me share this experience with you, and because it seems to align with what you're saying. So a couple of years ago, I was painting my garage, and turned out to be a way bigger job than I thought it would be. So I was in there probably 3 times longer than I thought I would be. But I just had my headphones in, wireless. I was listening to podcasts, which I just love to do. I think I had Jordan Peterson in, and then my headphones died. And then I had like 3 more hours to go. And so it was just a man in his thoughts on this ladder painting his garage for 3 hours. And all I could think about were those stupid YouTube Reels that they just rolled through my head. And I realized in that moment that like it was eating my free time, and it was eating my free thoughts. Like I just lost the ability to sit and think for myself, because every time I had the opportunity to sit and think for myself, I just poured it right back into the phone. Does that seem consistent with your findings?
Yeah, it seems like it's a huge distraction. But the problem with the distraction is that there's a lot of deception, I think, that comes along too with it. There's so much information. You just can't sift through it all. You don't have time to sift through it all about what's accurate and what's not. You mentioned the reels and, kind of doom scrolling. We did a follow-up study to these other 2 that I mentioned. And this one was more contemporary because you might notice I haven't said anything about TikTok yet.
Oh, yeah.
And so we did a study on TikTok, expressly those people who used it and those people who did not. And we found very similar findings that people who used TikTok were having much poorer associated health variables. Depressive symptoms were higher. Loneliness was higher. Those are the two that come to mind in terms of their mental health. Sedentary behavior was, also not good. They were
So
having more
physical health even.
physical symptoms were higher as well. So people were saying they weren't feeling as good. Poor body image was also another thing that was related to TikTok. Again, suggesting that, as you're scrolling through that, not only are you, disrupted and your time is all taken up, but you might be subtly yet profoundly influenced to think negatively about yourself through social comparisons, through, looking at images that are, only the best of people. I believe it was Elder Stevenson. He had a general conference talk not too long ago where he talked about the cupcake. I don't know if you remember that image.
You'll have to remind me.
There was a cupcake, showed an image that was, I think it was on Instagram, and it was this perfect cupcake. But what had happened is the person, and I would do it too, had went down and cropped out this perfect cupcake out of the image, and you pulled it back, and you saw a messy kitchen. I think even said a child or two there, angry with each other or something.
Yeah.
And if you just zoom in on that one thing, yeah, it's perfect, but everything else is not. And so as we look at that and we see just the perfect image, that social comparison enters in, and we recognize that compared to that image that we're seeing, we don't measure up. And that can be have a cascading effect on people's mental health, their emotional health, and even social health. What are we seeing here as well, if not people having a hard time connecting with other people because that authenticity has been counterfeited so much that we have a hard time recognizing that. I'm just thinking about my church experience, sitting with a number of young men in the same room, and we're there talking with each other in a church meeting, and they're texting each other.
It's probably a small room too, huh?
What was that?
It's probably a small room, so you're like right next to these kids who are right next to each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've come to the point where I've kind of nicknamed this generation here that I'm dealing with now, and I shouldn't say dealing with. I love this generation, I do, but that I'm seeing is it's the distracted and the deceived. I think that, and that sounds rather negative, but let me say it a different way, that their difficulties they're having to deal with are distractions and deceptions because they're being thrown at them 24/7, and you just don't have the time to sift through it. And then, like you mentioned, when you have a quiet moment, you might not even then, without practice, without many quiet moments, being able to sift through it then when you have that time. So
they're being lied to. And bringing this back to worship, there is a God who is just beckoning them to worship. And it's the God of TikTok. It's the God of distraction or entertainment or hedonism. And I heard once, on the internet you can find, I think this is in General Conference, I can't tell you who said it, but they said, on the internet you can find whatever your heart desires. So what does your heart desire? And for most of us, like, we just want to numb out to the stresses of life, and so we seek entertainment. And I've got 3 kids, and if they could pick what they wanted to eat, like all day, every day, popsicle, ice cream, candy, there would be nothing good, and they would be miserable. And I think, like, mentally, it's that same thing. It's that I got this quick dopamine hit from this video, and so I'm just gonna keep consuming all of this entertainment sugar.
right. And Christian, again, I'm going to say this just so that our listeners don't to misunderstand. I do believe, and there is good evidence to suggest that social media does have many good elements to it, many good enabling qualities. For instance, I guess perhaps the best way to really term it is social media is a tool. And so it can be used for good or for ill. And like you mentioned there, and you kind of hinted at it, the role of being a father, I resonate with that. I understand. I have 4 children myself. If it's a tool and it can be used for good or bad, there needs to be some practice with using it. There needs to be some training. There needs to be some a foundational understanding that has been built. And so I commend you for, obviously with parenting, we know there's a large literature there. The parent provides scaffolding. The parent provides some structure, some bounds that can help the student or, the child to learn and to grow. And then taking it the next step with our Father in heaven, he has given us this scaffolding as well. He has given us the direction. He's given us the scriptures. He's given us the church. He's given us a prophet. Just wonderful, marvelous things that can help us. And so one thing I would also encourage, after doing this research and looking at health and these types of things, is look to the scaffold builders. Who is building your scaffolding? Is it the church? Are you following the church and what they're saying? Or are you following some other God, as you said, right? Is it TikTok? Are you letting that algorithm drive your life? Is it building your scaffolding for you?
And that's essentially religion. Like, what is your religion? What is pointing your life in this direction? And you could let TikTok be your religion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I should point out, it's been a few years now. I believe it was back in June 2018. Our new prophet at the time, President Russell M. Nelson, encouraged our youth to try a social media fast.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Remember that or not?
Yeah.
And I say this with even more trepidation, but I've pondered on it many times. Before he gave that challenge to the youth, and then later on to the entire world, to help people to see the difference between being plugged in all the time and taking a break, right?
Yeah.
And those are just the secular benefits and even health benefits. There's certainly some spiritual ones there as well. But before he did that, before he introduced it, he said that studies have shown that social media use is connected or linked to loneliness and depression. A little bit more to this backstory is Elder Clayton Weatherford of the 70 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints found my research study, that first one I told you about, the original one. Then this was because Deseret News, the local newspaper, they have a little segment called Church News. They had contacted me and they did an article on that.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Elder Clayton had read this, and then he called me up out of the blue, Christian. I mean, I've had a couple 70, by virtue of working for one of the BYUs, you need to have an interview or two with members of the 70. But this is out of the blue over the telephone, and he's asking me questions about, what are we supposed to know from your study? Because you've done it amongst our youth. It was BYU, Idaho. These are youth of the church. And so I shared with him some of these findings, and come to find out that he was doing his due diligence and trying to find out if we should put a phone in the hands of our missionaries at the time. But it was only a couple months after that's when President Nelson made this challenge for people to do a social fast.
Rob, this was you.
Well, he didn't say my name, and thank goodness he didn't. But it got me thinking, it's like, the work that we're doing here and the things that we're uncovering and that we're seeing, they do have some real practical value. And by practical, I mean not just secular, but also our spiritual lives here as well. For our prophet to make that connection, and of course he needs to do his due diligence too. I believe in divine revelation. I've seen it, I've felt it, I've experienced it through him. But on the same token, he wants you to study it out in your mind. He wants you to be anxiously engaged in a good cause, and doing the research helps with that. So anyway, social media is a tool, and we just need to have some scaffolding to help us with that.
Yeah, I really like that. So since my garage painting experience, I made a decision that day, and that was maybe 2 years ago or so, that one, I was getting off the news, which people fight me about that one. I've since dipped my toe back into it just to stay abreast of major events, but I was off the news, and then I decided I was not going to scroll anymore. So I could still use those. I could still use Facebook and Instagram, but I can't scroll. It's just for just connecting with people. So strictly, I can't go up or down. And what I found over the last 2 years is my anxiety went down enormously. I was less angry, which was surprising to me. I didn't realize I was angry until I wasn't. But like reading the news always made me angry all the time. And I felt better with myself. I think that I was more active physically because I was less inclined just to sit. My mind wasn't just focused on this box, and so I just had so many positive effects since doing that I would say in my anecdotal experience it kind of supports what you're saying. But I have a question for you, and it comes in twofold. In your experience, being parents, how can we teach our children or help them practice, or like what do we do as parents in this world where we have children and they have access to social media or could have access to it? Like, what do we do?
This is a very pertinent question and quite timely in fact that my we just gave my oldest son, he's 13 now, we just gave him a smartphone.
Okay.
And so very timely with your question here. And I'll say forthright and foremost, I'm still learning on how to implement this. I've got some general ideas that I can share with you and our listeners too, but certainly there's theory and then there's practice.
Okay. So we'll see how it shakes out.
So there's some, there can be a disconnect there. But what I would generally recommend is you've got to build trust with your child. And as you build that trust, you can then allow further opportunities, further privileges. Owning a phone should not be a privilege, or should not be a right, excuse me. It should be a privilege. Having access to all these different social media apps should be a privilege, not a right. And I think many parents get pushed into, well, you know, Jimmy down the street does this, and so do all my friends, and so do everybody, you know, and they can even use the church, say, well, we've got all these church apps, and so I need it, Dad or Mom, so that I can stay connected with people at church. I mean, it's become such a good tool that I think parents sometimes can feel overwhelmed on that. So we need to safeguard ourselves about that. But the way to do that, I really think, is to start off slow. Start off with very basic. With your child, give them a phone so that it can make a phone call, so that it can text, and then monitor what they're doing and build up. So you're building a foundation along with them. Yes, you're practicing.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, Christian, this past month, I've been practicing with my son too on how this works. But as you go along, then you can start adding. And then there's this, you think about the metaphor here with God. He doesn't give us a whole bunch of revelation all at once, typically, because number one, we're not ready for it. But number two, if he were to do that, and if we were to slip up, which we would do, the condemnation or the consequences for that would by law, have to be even stronger. There would be no room for faith. There would be no room for that growth, that development. And so in many ways, I see in, putting a smartphone in your child's hands, you really have to put yourself in the shoes of deity and try to help your child to grow and develop. Now, that being said, I mean, we're not all powerful and all knowing like
yeah,
deity.
Those are big shoes to fill.
Yeah, well, yeah. There's some constraints to this metaphor, but I think the basic principle holds that I've lived my life for a lot longer than you have as my child. I know a bit better when it comes to a number of things.
Well, you know them more than most, especially in this realm.
Well, I try to tell my kids that. It doesn't go over as well as you think.
They don't believe you. Give me his number. I'll tell him.
Oh, it's okay. We're all learning it. They do fine, but this idea of trying to build it line upon line, precept upon precept, even with smartphone and technology as tools.
Yeah, I love that. did you read? There's a book. What was it called? The Anxious Generation came out, I think, last year.
I have it on my shelf. I know the basic premise of it. It's on my list to read,
Yeah,
but I've heard very good things about it, and the basic premise of it, I'm a big fan.
yeah,
Yeah.
very similar. I would say that you're in the same realm as far as what you studied and the outcome of those studies. But after I read that book, I just wanted to be so militant. Like, my kids are not going to have phones until they're 18. Hearing you, though, has helped kind of soften that. Like, maybe I can't just open the floodgates at 18 and say, okay, now you're ready. But they need those stepping stones to practice on how to responsibly use a phone.
Even waiting until they're 18 and then giving them a phone with full
Yeah,
access, that might be even more dangerous than giving them a phone when they're at home, and they can again have some of that training. It's a tough thing to do, and our generation now becoming adults and becoming parents, we've got to navigate this. This is
yeah.
our standard. This is our cross to bear up and to figure out what to do.
So then my second question here, for those of us who grew up, cell phones came out when my generation was in middle school. So that's when we all got cell phones. That's when it started to get hot. And then social media came several years later. But those of us who kind of grew up with this, and it's just been a part of our lives for the last 15 years, if I got out, I don't do well in the gray zone. I'm in or I'm out. And so I've just been all out. And I think there are some things I've missed because of that. Most people aren't like that. If there is somebody listening to this who maybe feels like I'm spending too much, or maybe I feel lonely or depressed, or maybe I want better health outcomes, it sounds like spending less time on social media could help with that. How could somebody who's developed these neural pathways in their head break from the phone?
Especially when they're so tempting, so
Yeah,
tantalizing, and we have an established pattern of behavior of using them, right?
yeah,
Yeah. It's very difficult. I agree. I guess I go back to a couple things, starting with President Nelson with his social media fast. What I would encourage our listeners to do is to think back to that time. Were you successful? Was there a positive experience of you pulling back from your phone for a little bit and building on that so that you have a sense of efficacy? You have a sense of, I can do this. If you don't have any of that, then I would say try it out. Try for just one day. Just one day. Similar to a diet. Just one day. Try it out where you don't look at the phone at all and build on that. Now, I'm not going to advocate for abstinence on this either, though, which makes it, as you mentioned, it's that gray area. I'm either in or I'm out, type of people. What this does require for us to do, though, is to exert some of that self-control. We can also learn from looking at other behaviors that can become addictions. And make no mistake, there are diagnoses out there that exist for smartphone addiction and related things. I mean, it does exist. But similar to that, you can try to find a behavior that you replace your social media behavior with. Do something that replaces it. So there's a number of things you could do if you're not in freezing cold Rexburg, Idaho right now. For instance, you could go on a walk, right? You could take up a new hobby. One thing I did during COVID, during the pandemic lockdown, I experimented with cooking. That was fun. Finding something like that. The biggest challenge that you're going to have there, of course, is breaking out of the inertia. I'm doing what I'm always doing, and I've got to now try something new. But if you can find a behavior that's not congruent with using social media, find something to replace that time, that is another option that can help a great deal here as well. Of course, similar to other behaviors like diets, if you remove the temptation altogether, that's helpful. If you delete the app that you find yourself is making you more angry or more, what was the other word you said? Anxious.
Yeah.
Anxious or angry. Delete that app. Remove the temptation. Get rid of the candy if you're having a problem, eating it.
It's hard to throw away cinnamon rolls, though. Like, they're just so good.
That's very true too. And then having some type of social accountability. If you can have a friend who does it with you as well, a spouse, even a child who's doing it with you too, where you can know that you are not alone, that there's someone else out there supporting you in your efforts because they are doing it too, or at least that they know about you doing it. That can be incredibly empowering as well.
Those that sounds very wise. It sounds very similar to how one might approach tackling an addiction. Very
Yes.
similar process. The one thing that I did that I found incredibly helpful, and again, I acknowledge that most people probably shouldn't do this because again, I have to be in or out. I can't go halfway social media. I have to be all the way out. But I deleted everything, and then anytime my mind reached out for those dumb reels, instead I opened the gospel library and I read some scriptures, and I retrained my brain to when it reaches out for my phone, it's not a bad thing anymore. Now I'm reaching and I'm reading scriptures, and it like turned my whole life around. And I found that it's like now I started to be filled with more and more light, and I just learned these cool things every single week that I could share with people. It became really fun to then look at my phone. It wasn't this sugar high. It was actual nutrition for my soul.
One thing I've done very similar to that is I tend to get on the news app too. It's really easy and I can scroll on it, and there's even things that pop up that says for you, and there are
Yeah,
articles
they know you so well.
Yeah, yeah. And so I get up every morning and exercise. Often it's on a recumbent bike, so I can sit back and I can look at my phone as I'm biking, right? And I've found, well, as a New Year's resolution, I decided I wanted to read more of the standard works and related things too. I'd always read the scriptures. That was always something I've done, but now instead of doing that as much in terms of the news feed, I've been reading Jesus the Christ on my phone while I'm biking. And so, I still listen to some music, when I'm done reading. But that has been very helpful for me too. Just like what you said, there's filling your life with these things so you're purposely trying to seek out the light rather than just casually letting anything in. I think that that's a very important thing that you brought up there. I agree.
Yeah. So I like how you mentioned at the beginning. It's about becoming, and the gospel is a gospel of becoming, and we're becoming every single day. And the inputs we give it, our lives equal the outputs, and we become the sum total of our decisions up to this point. And so if we're not happy with who we are, we can easily change that, and we just change the inputs to do that. And I think better inputs equal better outputs. And so replacing some of those negative influences with positive ones will just change that trajectory enormously over time. And that's been my experience. So, Dr. Rob Wright, that was awesome. And I had I know you've got other studies, 3 or 4 more that I wanted to dive into. We don't have time. I think we're going to need to have a part 2 at some point, because I want to dive into the dating one. Seemed very interesting to me. And there was a sense one that has to do with health behavior changes, which seems fascinating. So let's plan on that. Let's plan on getting together again, because this was just eye-opening to me.
I look forward to that. Thank you, Christian.
Yeah, and before we sign off, I just want to give you the chance to have a last word. Sometimes people share a scripture that's impactful. Sometimes they just, if I could share something with everybody listening, what would it be? But if you just want to take a minute and share something with everybody listening, I'll give you a shot.
Oh, thank you. I, again, want to reiterate one of the main things that I've been trying to say here is the social media is a tool, and it's here to stay. We can see that it's here. I don't think, as with most tools, that it's good or bad. It has a utility, and the faster that we can learn to use this tool in a responsible manner, the better our outcomes will be, from health to how we interact with people, to especially with how we interact with our God and how we connect with Him. And it's really my hope as we go forward that as we're trying to use technology, that we can do so responsibly. And perhaps Nephi says is the best, that we might be able to use it, and that our performance will be consecrated to the welfare of our souls. and so that we can have the confidence that we would like to have to stand before our God someday and to say, these were the talents that you gave me, and this is what I did with them. That's what I really hope that we can do, because social media, what a wonderful talent it is, especially as we learn to use it responsibly. And that's my hope and my prayer going forward.
Thank you. I had a dumb joke. I'm not even going to bring it up because that was the perfect way to end this. Thank you, Rob, for joining us on The Rebellion.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you, Christian.
Thanks for joining this episode of The Holy Rebellion. We'll see you next week.